The silence between us. Priya Sharma stared at the wedding photo perched on the mantel, a perfect image of matrimonial bliss that couldn't be further from reality. Her crimson lehenga and Nathaniel Wilson's tailored suit created a striking visual harmony that their actual relationship had never achieved. 3 years into their arranged marriage, and they had perfected the art of occupying the same space without truly sharing it. The union had made sense on paper. Her parents, first-generation Indian immigrants who had built a successful restaurant chain, sought stability for their only daughter. Nathaniel, Nate, came from a respected family with strong business connections that complemented the Sharma enterprises. Both families had orchestrated the match with spreadsheets and practical considerations rather than romance. Priya placed her coffee mug in the sink, careful not to make too much noise. Nate would emerge from his bedroom in approximately 12 minutes, precisely timed to avoid their paths crossing for too long. Their morning choreography was flawless, a dance of avoidance refined over 36 months of polite coexistence. "Good morning," Nate's voice came from behind her, disrupting the routine. Priya turned, surprised. "You're up early." Client meeting across town. He wore his navy suit, the one reserved for important business dealings. Tall with broad shoulders, Nate possessed the kind of presence that commanded attention in corporate boardrooms. His dark hair was neatly styled, his expression professionally neutral, as if addressing a business associate rather than his wife. "I made coffee," she offered, gesturing toward the pot. "Thanks." He poured himself a cup, adding precisely 1 teaspoon of sugar, a detail Priya had noticed but never mentioned. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking clock and the occasional sip of coffee. Priya scrolled through her phone, pretending to read emails. In reality, she was calculating how much longer this interaction would last before she could retreat to the sanctuary of her architectural drafting table in the spare bedroom she'd converted to a home office. "Will you be home for dinner?" she asked, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. They rarely coordinated meals. Nate looked genuinely surprised by the question. "I have a late meeting." "Don't wait up." "I wasn't planning to," Priya replied quickly, then regretted her tone. "I mean, I have work to finish anyway." Nate nodded, his eyes briefly meeting hers before sliding away. Something flickered there, disappointment, relief. After 3 years, Priya still couldn't read him. They existed in parallel universes that occasionally intersected in this sleek modern house that had never felt like a home. The property was beautiful. A craftsman-style residence in a desirable neighborhood with a garden Priya had once imagined filling with flowers. Now the garden, like their marriage, remained in a perpetual state of potential, waiting for care that never came. Later that evening, Priya sat at the dining table with architectural plans spread before her. Her firm was competing for a major project, a community center that would showcase sustainable design. The work energized her in ways her personal life never did. The front door opened at 9:47 p.m. Nate's footsteps paused briefly at the sight of her still working at the table, then continued toward his bedroom. No greeting, no questions about her day. Just the sound of his bedroom door closing with a soft click that somehow echoed through the house. Priya stared at the closed door, wondering about the man behind it. What did he think about when he was alone? Did he ever question how they'd ended up like this? 2 strangers sharing an address and a last name, but nothing more. She remembered their wedding day, the hope beneath her nervousness, the possibility that arranged could eventually become arranged and in love, like her parents. They had started as strangers too, but her father couldn't go a day without bringing her mother fresh flowers, and her mother still blushed when he called her his heart. The house phone rang, startling Priya from her thoughts. Nobody called their landline except, "Beta? Are you still awake?" Her mother's voice carried the familiar melody of home. "Hi, Mom. Yes, I'm working late." "And Nathaniel? He's home." The answer was technically true. Good. "Your father and I were thinking about visiting next month for your anniversary. 3 years is special, you know." Priya closed her eyes, imagining the awkward celebration, the pretend affection for her parents' benefit. "That sounds nice, Mom." After the call, she gathered her drawings and headed to her bedroom, the one across the hall from Nate's. As she passed his door, she heard the soft murmur of a phone conversation, a gentle laugh she never heard directed at her. In her room, Priya changed into her pajamas and sat cross-legged on the bed. The house was quiet again, the silence heavier than usual. She picked up her journal, opening to a blank page. Day 1095 of our arrangement, she wrote. Still strangers. She closed the journal, unaware that across the hall, Nate was staring at their wedding photo on his nightstand, wondering if things could ever be different. Fractures in the foundation. Morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen blinds as Priya prepared her breakfast smoothie, the blender's whirring breaking the usual silence of the house. She'd stayed up until 2 a.m. finalizing her design proposal for the community center project, and today was the presentation. Energy thrummed through her veins, a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The blender shut off just as Nate entered, his eyebrows rising slightly at her formal attire, a tailored charcoal pantsuit that she'd splurged on specifically for important presentations. Big day? He asked, reaching past her for a mug. Final pitch for the Westbrook Community Center. Priya poured her smoothie, adding, "If we get it, it'll be the largest project I've led." Nate nodded, his expression unreadable. Good luck. The words were correct, but the delivery was mechanical, like a programmed response. Priya found herself wishing for more. Genuine interest, perhaps, or even simple curiosity about her work. She'd seen his passion when he spoke about his own projects during rare dinner conversations with mutual friends. That animated version of Nate never appeared when it was just the two of them. Thanks. She gathered her portfolio case and tablet. I should be home around 7. Nate checked his watch. I have dinner with the Harrington clients tonight. It might go late. Of course. It was always like this. Ships passing in the night, their trajectories carefully calculated to minimize collision. The architecture firm buzzed with energy when Priya arrived. Her team had transformed the conference room with their presentation boards and a scale model of the proposed community center. Her design incorporated the existing 100-year-old oak trees on the property, working them into a flowing structure that seemed to embrace the natural landscape. They're going to love it, said Jasmine, her closest colleague, squeezing her shoulder. This is brilliant work, Pry. The presentation went better than she could have hoped. The city council members leaned forward in their chairs, nodding as she explained the sustainable features and community benefits. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Ms. Sharma, this is exceptional, said Councilwoman Torres. Exactly the forward-thinking approach we've been looking for. Later that afternoon, Marcus Bennett, the firm's founding partner, called Priya into his office. His wide smile told her everything before he spoke. We got it. The contract will be finalized next week. He leaned back in his chair. There's something else we need to discuss. The Westbrook project is just the beginning. We've been invited to bid on similar centers in Portland and Austin. Priya's heart raced. That's amazing, it is, and we want you to lead those projects too. Marcus's expression grew serious, but it would involve significant travel for the next year. 6 months in Portland, followed by Austin. We'd need you on site to oversee implementation. The opportunity was everything she'd worked for. Recognition, creative control, career advancement. Yet her first thought was of Nate and their fragile arrangement. Would a year apart shatter it completely, or simply formalize the distance that already existed? I'll need to discuss this with my husband, she said finally. Marcus nodded. Of course. Take the weekend to think about it. We need your decision by Monday. That evening, Priya paced the empty house, rehearsing how to broach the subject with Nate. Their marriage existed in a delicate equilibrium. Would this disrupt it beyond repair? Or would he be relieved by her absence? The front door opened at 10:22 p.m. Nate's tie was loosened, his expression tired but satisfied in the way that suggested a successful business dinner. How did your presentation go? He asked, surprising her with the question as he hung his coat. We got the contract. Priya couldn't help the pride that crept into her voice. And there's more. They want me to lead similar projects in Portland and Austin. That's impressive. For a moment, genuine admiration crossed his features. It would mean relocating for about a year. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Nate's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral. I see. I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to discuss it with you first. He moved to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. What's there to discuss? It's a great opportunity. His casualness stung more than objection would have. It would mean living apart, Nate. And that would be different from now. How exactly? The words landed like a physical blow. They had never acknowledged the emptiness of their arrangement so directly. "That's not fair," Priya said quietly. "Isn't it?" Nate turned to face her. "We live in the same house, but we're already living separate lives. At least this way one of us gets something meaningful from it. Is that what you want?"
For me to go?
"What I want—" He stopped abruptly, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "What does it matter what I want? We both know what this is." "And what is that exactly?" Priya challenged, years of unspoken questions suddenly demanding answers. "A business arrangement, a merger of families, convenient cohabitation." Each definition felt colder than the last. It was never about what either of us wanted. It could have been more. The words escaped before she could stop them. Nate's expression flickered with something unidentifiable.
Could it?
"We never even tried." "Neither of us tried," Priya corrected, her voice barely audible. The silence that followed was deafening. Nate placed his glass in the sink with deliberate care. "Take the position," he said finally. "You've earned it. Don't let this—" he gestured between them— "hold you back." "And what about us? Our marriage?" Nate's laugh was hollow. "What marriage, Priya? We're roommates with matching rings and separate lives." The truth of his assessment hit her with unexpected force. They'd been playing house for 3 years, going through the motions without substance. Perhaps distance would simply make their reality more honest. "Fine," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I'll tell Marcus yes on Monday." "Congratulations," Nate offered, the word sincere despite everything. "Your parents will be proud. And yours?" His expression hardened. "My parents will understand a career opportunity. That's all they've ever cared about anyway. Appearances and achievements." For a moment, Priya glimpsed something beneath his composed exterior, a hint of the same loneliness she carried. But before she could respond, he turned away. "I have an early meeting tomorrow. Good night, Priya." She watched him retreat to his bedroom, the door closing with finality. In the sudden emptiness of the living room, Priya wondered if she'd just witnessed the beginning of the end, or if there had ever been a real beginning to end. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, imagining a year of freedom from this elegant prison they'd constructed. Perhaps the distance would provide clarity, or perhaps it would simply confirm what Nate had said, that they weren't really married at all, just two people playing parts in a production neither of them had written. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest, like mourning something she'd never actually possessed. The night of revelations. 3 weeks after accepting the Portland project, Priya's suitcases stood by the front door, sentinels marking her imminent departure. The house felt different somehow, as if already adjusting to the absence that would soon become reality. Thunder rumbled in the distance as she double-checked her travel documents. The weather forecast had predicted severe storms across the region, but her flight wasn't until tomorrow afternoon. Plenty of time for the system to pass. Nate had been scarce since their confrontation, working late and leaving early. Their interactions had been reduced to text messages about practical matters: bills paid, mail collected, maintenance scheduled. The growing distance felt like a preview of the year ahead. The front door opened and Priya looked up in surprise. Nate wasn't supposed to be home until later. "You're early," she said, stating the obvious. He shook raindrops from his coat. "The office closed early. Storm warnings." His eyes fell on her luggage.
All packed?
"Just about." She hesitated. "I was going to order takeout for dinner. Would you want to join?" The invitation hung awkwardly between them, their first voluntary meal together in months. Nate seemed as surprised by the offer as she was by making it. "Sure," he said finally. "Thai? I was thinking Indian, actually. From my parents' restaurant." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Your father's butter chicken is still the best I've ever had." This small admission that he remembered and appreciated something from her family caught Priya off guard. She'd assumed he viewed her heritage as merely another business connection. "I'll call it in." While they waited for delivery, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against windows. Wind howled through trees and lightning flashed with increasing frequency. Nate moved around the house, checking windows and gathering emergency supplies. Flashlights, candles, bottled water, with practiced efficiency. "Power outages are likely," he explained, noticing her watching him. "Better to be prepared." The food arrived just as the first transformer blew somewhere in their neighborhood. Lights flickered ominously before stabilizing. They ate at the dining table, the storm providing a dramatic soundtrack to their awkward meal. Conversation came in fits and starts, weather observations giving way to careful questions about Priya's upcoming project and Nate's recent client acquisitions. "Your mother called yesterday," Nate mentioned, serving himself more saag paneer. "She wanted to know if we needed anything before you left." Priya paused mid-bite. "You spoke with my mother?" "She calls every few weeks." He shrugged as if this were common knowledge. "Usually when she knows you're working late." I didn't know that. The revelation that her mother and husband had regular conversations without her knowledge was disorienting. "What do you talk about?" "Recipes mostly. She's been teaching me to make some of your favorite dishes." Priya stared at him, trying to reconcile this information with the distant man she thought she knew. "You've been learning to cook Indian food?" "From my mother?" Nate's expression grew guarded. "I thought, when you visited between projects, you might appreciate familiar food." Before she could process this unexpected thoughtfulness, the lights went out completely, plunging the house into darkness except for the occasional flash of lightning. "Perfect timing," Nate muttered, rising to retrieve the flashlights he'd prepared. In the sudden darkness, the house felt smaller, more intimate. Nate lit several candles, their warm glow creating pools of light in the dining area. They continued eating by candlelight, the strange circumstances lending an unexpected peace to their meal. "When I was little," Priya said, breaking a long silence, "power outages were my favorite. My parents would tell stories about their childhood in India. It was the only time they seemed to slow down." Nate considered this, the candlelight casting shadows across his features. "My parents viewed outages as inefficiencies to be overcome. My father would immediately start the generator and we'd continue as if nothing had happened." "That sounds like your father," Priya observed, realizing how little they'd shared about their families despite the supposedly close business relationships. "He believes in maintaining control, especially during chaos." Nate's voice held an edge she rarely heard. "It's why our marriage made sense to him. A controlled alliance rather than the unpredictability of love." The candid admission stunned her. "Is that how you see our marriage too?" The storm chose that moment to escalate dramatically. Wind shrieked around the house and something heavy crashed against the back patio. They both jumped up to investigate, flashlights revealing a large tree branch had smashed through the glass door, allowing rain and debris to flood in. "We need to seal this off," Nate shouted over the howling wind. They worked together seamlessly, Priya holding a large piece of plywood while Nate secured it across the broken door. Water soaked their clothes and pooled on the hardwood floor. "The guest bathroom has towels," Priya directed, already moving to retrieve them. For the next hour, they fought against the elements, mopping water, checking for additional damage, moving furniture away from vulnerable areas. The physical labor and shared purpose created an unexpected harmony between them, a synchronized dance they'd never experienced in 3 years of marriage. Eventually, the immediate crisis contained. They collapsed onto the living room sofa, exhausted and still damp. The storm continued outside, but inside, a different kind of atmosphere had developed. An intimate bubble created by candlelight, shared effort, and the isolation of being cut off from the outside world. "You never answered my question," Priya said quietly, wringing water from her hair. Nate was silent for so long she thought he might not respond. "I didn't want a controlled alliance," he finally said, staring into the candle flame. "But I didn't know how to create anything else." "What do you mean?" He shifted uncomfortably. "My parents' marriage is a business partnership. Effective, productive, completely devoid of affection. I grew up thinking that was normal." He laughed without humor. "I don't even know what a loving marriage looks like." The confession hung in the air between them. Priya thought of her own parents, their playful teasing, casual touches, private jokes, and the stark contrast to the Wilson household she'd visited only a handful of times. "The night we met," she said carefully, "at the engagement dinner. You seemed so confident." "I was terrified," he admitted, "but I'd been trained since childhood to project certainty, especially when feeling none." He turned to look at her directly. "I thought you were disappointed. You barely spoke to me." "I was nervous," Priya confessed, "and when you were so formal afterward, I assumed you were just going through with it for your family's sake." "I thought the same about you." They sat with this revelation, the candles flickering as the storm began to subside outside. We never gave ourselves a chance, did we? Priya's voice was barely above a whisper. Nate reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against hers in the narrow space between them on the sofa. The contact, so simple yet unprecedented in their relationship, sent warmth spreading up her arm. I didn't want you to leave, he confessed, but I had no right to ask you to stay for this. He gestured vaguely at the space between them. What if it could be something else? The question escaped before she could consider its implications. Thunder rumbled in the distance, softer now as the storm moved away. In the candlelight, Nate's expression was open in a way she'd never seen before. Vulnerable, hopeful, afraid. I don't know how to build something real, he admitted. But I think I'd like to try. Priya turned her hand over, her palm meeting his. Their fingers intertwined. A small bridge across the vast distance they'd maintained for years. Maybe we start here, she said softly, with the truth, with actually seeing each other. As if on cue, the lights flickered back to life, sudden brightness flooding the room. They blinked against the harsh reality of electric light, both wondering if the moment of connection would survive illumination. Nate didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he looked at their intertwined fingers with something like wonder. I've never told anyone about my parents, he said. Not even my closest friends. Why me?
Why now?
He considered the question seriously. Maybe because you're leaving tomorrow. Or maybe because tonight is the first time I've felt like we're actually in the same room, not just occupying the same space. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a gentle rain and clearing skies. Inside, something had shifted, fragile and uncertain but undeniably real. I can postpone my flight, Priya said, surprising herself with the offer. Just for a few days, Nate shook his head. The project is important to you, and maybe some distance is what we need to figure out what we want separately before we try to build something together. Letters, Priya suggested suddenly, not texts or emails, actual letters. Things we'd never say face to face. The idea hung between them, a lifeline across the coming separation, a way to bridge the gap they'd never attempted to cross before. I'd like that, Nate said, his voice rough with emotion. Neither of them had allowed themselves to acknowledge until this strange, storm-swept night. They remained on the sofa until dawn, talking more openly than they ever had before, about childhoods, disappointments, dreams they'd never shared. When morning light replaced the candles, they were still holding hands, exhausted but somehow lighter, as if the storm had washed away more than just the physical debris. Tomorrow, Priya would still leave for Portland. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she might actually be leaving something behind. Not just a house and a nominal husband, but the possibility of a connection worth returning to. Small steps across the divide. Priya stared at the blank stationery for nearly an hour before writing the first sentence. How did one begin a letter to a husband who was practically a stranger? A husband with whom she'd shared a roof but little else until a storm had literally and figuratively shattered their carefully constructed barriers. Her Portland apartment was spare but functional, a temporary home with rental furniture and bare walls. The community center project consumed her days with meetings, site visits, and design revisions. But in the evenings, the silence reminded her of a different kind of emptiness back in the house she shared with Nate. Dear Nate, she finally wrote, the formality feeling both ridiculous and necessary. Portland is beautiful in autumn. The trees along the riverfront have turned crimson and gold, and the mornings are misty and cool. My team is talented but opinionated. Every design decision requires diplomatic negotiations that would impress the United Nations. She paused, realizing she was filling the page with safe observations rather than the truths they had promised to exchange. With a deep breath, she continued, I keep thinking about what you said during the storm, that you don't know what a loving marriage looks like. I realize I never told you that my parents' marriage wasn't arranged. They eloped against both families' wishes and were ostracized for years. The restaurant empire came much later after reconciliation. The business partnership my father presented to yours was built on love first, commerce second. I wonder if knowing this would have changed anything for us. If I had shared this truth from the beginning, would we have approached our arrangement differently? Yesterday I caught myself looking for your coffee mug in the cabinet before remembering where I was. It's strange how absence can make you notice the small habits you never acknowledged when they were happening. I don't know what we're doing with these letters, or what we're building, if anything. But I'm writing anyway. She sealed the envelope before she could reconsider, addressing it to their shared home where Nate remained. 2 weeks passed before his reply arrived, a crisp white envelope with her name written in his precise handwriting. Priya's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Priya, your father called yesterday about the quarterly business review. Afterward, I asked him about the elopement. He laughed and said he was wondering when you would tell me that story. There's a photograph in his office, did you know? Of them on what he called their honeymoon, 3 days in a cabin his cousin owned. They look impossibly young and absolutely terrified, but happy. I asked him how they knew it would work when everything was against them. He said they didn't know. They just knew not trying would be worse than failing. I think about that storm night often, about how easily we could have continued as we were if not for the broken door, the power outage, the forced proximity, 3 years of careful distance undone by weather. Your mother has continued our cooking lessons over the phone. I've enclosed her rating of my latest attempt at biryani, 6 to 10. Apparently my rice technique needs work. She asks about you constantly. I think she suspects something has shifted between us, but isn't sure what. The house feels different without you. Emptier, which is strange considering how little we interacted before. I've been working from home more often. The silence is sometimes overwhelming. I found myself wandering into your home office yesterday. There are sketches on your drafting table. Preliminary ideas for the Austin project, I think. Your talent has always impressed me, though I never told you that. I should have. Nate P.S. I've never eloped or defied my parents in any significant way. Perhaps that's been the problem. Priya read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers. The reference to her sketches should have felt invasive. Her office had been her sanctuary, her private space. Instead, she felt a surprising warmth at the thought of Nate taking interest in her work. Their correspondence continued over the following weeks, each letter venturing further from safe topics into uncharted emotional territory. Priya described childhood memories and professional insecurities. Nate revealed his complicated relationship with his father and his secret passion for astronomy, a hobby his parents had discouraged as impractical. In late November, Priya's phone rang with Nate's number, their first call since her departure. Hello? She answered, suddenly nervous. Hi. His voice sounded different somehow, less controlled, more human. Sorry to call instead of write, but I needed to ask you something that couldn't wait for the mail. Is everything okay? Yes, it's just, he paused. Your parents' anniversary party is next month. They've invited me and I wanted to know if you'd be uncomfortable with me attending. The consideration in the question, his awareness of her feelings, his willingness to decline despite family expectations, felt monumental compared to their previous interactions. Actually, Priya said slowly, I was planning to fly back for it. We could go together. The silence that followed held a different quality than their usual awkward pauses. This one felt charged with possibility. I'd like that, Nate said finally. Maybe we could have dinner the night before. Just us, like a date? The word slipped out before she could stop it. His laugh was warm, genuine. Yes, exactly like a date. Our first, technically. The prospect of dating her husband of 3 years should have felt absurd. Instead, it sent a flutter of anticipation through her chest. I'd like that, she echoed his words. 2 weeks later, Priya stood in front of her childhood home, oddly nervous about seeing Nate. Their letters had created an intimacy their physical relationship had never achieved. Would that translate to real life, or would they revert to their former awkwardness? The door opened before she could knock, revealing her mother, who enveloped her in a tight hug smelling of cardamom and cloves. Beta, finally, come in, come in. Nathaniel is already here. He brought the most beautiful flowers. Priya followed her mother through the familiar hallway into the kitchen, where her father was gesturing animatedly, while Nate chopped vegetables beside him. The domestic scene, Nate integrated into her family's kitchen rhythms, was so unexpected that Priya stopped in her tracks. Nate looked up, knife pausing mid-slice. Their eyes met, and the connection that had been building through ink and paper seemed to materialize in the space between them. Priya, he said, her name carrying a warmth she'd never heard from him before. Welcome home. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. Nate had indeed become her mother's cooking apprentice, discussing spice combinations with unexpected knowledge. Her father treated him not as a business connection but as family, teasing and including him in old stories. Later, as her parents argued good-naturedly about the music selection for their anniversary party, Priya and Nate found themselves alone on the back porch. "This is strange," she admitted, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the December chill. "Good strange or bad strange?" Nate asked, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth without quite touching. "Good strange. Like meeting someone I've been writing to for months, except that someone is my husband." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, not the polite version she'd grown accustomed to. "I've been thinking about how to approach this weekend. I made reservations for dinner tomorrow, but I realized I don't even know your favorite type of restaurant." "Thai," she answered, "but not the place near our house. Their curry is too sweet." "Noted." He hesitated, then added, "I found a small observatory about an hour outside the city. They have public viewing hours on Saturday nights. If you're interested." The invitation revealed more than just an activity. It was Nate sharing a part of himself he'd kept hidden, offering access to something he truly cared about. "I'd love that," Priya said softly. Their first date the following evening had all the hallmarks of early courtship. Priya spent too long choosing her outfit. Nate arrived with flowers. Conversation alternated between flowing easily and stalling in moments of self-consciousness. They discovered shared tastes in music and films they'd never discussed, political views that aligned more than either had realized, and a mutual dislike of their neighborhood homeowners association that prompted their first shared laughter. "I feel like I should walk you to your door," Nate said as they returned to her parents' house, where she was staying. "That would be very gentlemanly," Priya replied, surprising herself with the flirtatious tone. At the doorstep, they faced each other awkwardly. "This is usually when the question of a goodnight kiss arises," Nate observed, his voice light but his eyes serious. "Usually on a first date," Priya agreed. "Though our situation is hardly usual. May I?" he asked simply. The question, his deference to her wishes so different from the polite distance they'd maintained for years, made her decision easy. Priya stepped forward, closing the space between them, and raised her face to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a statement. When they separated, Nate's expression held wonder and uncertainty in equal measure. "That was," he began. "Our first." Priya finished for him. "Actually our first." The weekend continued with small discoveries and cautious steps toward each other. At her parents' anniversary celebration, they danced together for the first time since their wedding. But unlike that choreographed performance, this dance felt natural, unforced. Nate's hand at the small of her back seemed to belong there. At the observatory, Priya watched Nate transform as he explained constellations and planetary movements, his usual reserve replaced by genuine enthusiasm. When he helped her adjust the telescope to view Saturn's rings, his hands guiding hers with gentle precision, the simple contact felt more intimate than any they had shared in their years of marriage. "I wish you didn't have to go back tomorrow," Nate said as they drove home, the car filled with comfortable silence and possibility. "Me too," Priya admitted. "But Portland needs finishing, and then there's Austin." And then? The question contained universes. And then, return to their previous arrangement? Attempt something new? Acknowledge the fragile connection growing between them, or pretend the weekend had never happened? "And then we figure it out," Priya said finally. "Together." As Nate drove, his right hand found hers across the console, a small gesture that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Their fingers intertwined with newfound familiarity, a physical manifestation of the bridge they were slowly, carefully constructing across years of emotional distance. The next morning at the airport, their goodbye held none of the relief that had marked her departure months earlier. Instead, it carried the bittersweet ache of separation after connection. "Write to me," Priya said as her flight was called. "Every day," Nate promised, his kiss lingering longer this time, as if storing the sensation for the weeks ahead. On the plane, Priya touched her lips, still feeling the impression of his. They had traveled an impossible distance, from strangers sharing a house to something with no adequate name yet. Not quite lovers, more than friends, husband and wife in reality rather than just documentation. Whatever they were becoming, it felt like finally coming home. A home built together. 6 months after the Portland project ended and 3 months into Austin, Priya stood in the airport arrival area, scanning the crowd. Her stomach fluttered with a nervousness that seemed ridiculous given the circumstances. She'd been married to Nate for 4 years, yet this moment felt like meeting someone new. Priya. She turned at his voice, and there he was, slightly tanned from spending more time in their garden, a hesitant smile lighting his features. In his hands he held a small, worn telescope. "You brought your father's telescope?" she asked, surprised at the sentiment. "I thought we might stargaze tonight. The hill behind our house has the perfect view." His emphasis on our house was subtle but meaningful. "Welcome home." Home. The word carried weight it never had before. Their drive was filled with easy conversation about her project, his recent astronomy club meetings, and the latest antics of her parents. The letters and weekly video calls had maintained their connection, but being physically present together still felt new, precious. As they pulled into the driveway, Priya noticed changes: flower beds where there had been only mulch, wind chimes hanging from the porch, a patio set on the deck. "You've been busy," she observed. "I wanted it to feel like—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Like somewhere we'd both want to live, not just exist." Inside, more surprises awaited. The formal living room had been transformed with colorful throw pillows that reminded her of her parents' home. Family photos, both his and hers, adorned walls that had once been decorator neutral. In the kitchen, spices from her mother's collection sat in a custom rack. "The guest bedroom is still your office," Nate explained as they moved through the house. "I haven't touched anything in there. But I did add something to the master bedroom, if that's okay." The master bedroom, a room she had barely entered during their first 3 years. Now Nate opened the door to reveal a king-sized bed replacing the queen they'd barely shared. "With nightstands on both sides, I thought maybe," he began, uncharacteristically uncertain. Priya set down her bag and took his hand. "It's perfect." Later that evening, they sat on a blanket on the hillside, the telescope positioned to catch the first evening stars. Priya leaned against Nate's chest, his arms wrapped around her against the slight chill. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a key. "We already have the same house key," she said, confused. "It's not to our house. It's to a studio space I rented downtown. For your architecture work." He spoke quickly, nervous. "I thought when the Austin project ends, you might want to start your own firm instead of returning to Marcus. You've talked about it in your letters, designing on your own terms." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, his attention to her dreams, his support of her independence overwhelmed her. "There's something else," he continued. "The studio has an apartment upstairs. I thought we could live there part-time when you need to work late, or just when we want to be in the city." "2 homes?" Priya asked, turning to face him. "1 home," Nate corrected, "with 2 locations. Wherever we're together." The night sky opened above them, stars emerging one by one. Priya reached up to trace the line of his jaw, still marveling that this man who had been a stranger for so long now felt like her truest connection. "When did you know," she asked softly, "that this could be real between us?" Nate considered the question seriously. "Maybe that first letter, when you told me about your parents eloping. It was the first time I felt like you were showing me something real, not just what you thought I wanted to see." He smiled. "When did you know?" "When I came home for my parents' anniversary and you knew exactly how I take my tea. 4 years together, and it was the first time I felt seen. Their kiss beneath the stars felt like a vow, more meaningful than the ceremonial ones they'd exchanged years earlier without understanding what they were promising. The Austin project would end in 3 months. After that, they had plans. Her new firm, weekend trips to dark sky preserves for Nate's astronomy, a real honeymoon they'd never taken. But more important than any plan was the foundation they'd built, letter by letter, call by call, moment by moment. They had learned that sharing a house didn't make a home, but sharing truths, dreams, and genuine presence could transform mere walls into something sacred. As the first planet appeared in the telescope's lens, Nate guided Priya's eye to the eyepiece. "Look," he whispered. "Venus." The planet of love, bright against the darkening sky, seemed an appropriate sentinel for their evening. Not the beginning of their story, They were well past beginnings, but perhaps the start of the chapter they were always meant to write together. Two people who had traveled from arrangement to alienation, to authentic connection. Two parallel lives that had finally beautifully intersected. Two hearts that had found their way home.